housekeeping. Can you please keep your mics muted and your videos off during the presentation? It definitely saves bandwidth for everybody. Today we listen to what's going to be a very interesting talk on agrogeology in agriculture. And I hope there are more people here who know what agrogeology is. We've just been getting a very brief introduction to it, and so looking forward to it. Our speaker today is Eugene. He is an earth scientist at the Agricultural Research Council, Institute for Soil, Climate and Water in Pretoria. He's also a master's student in Earth Observation, which is remote sensing to you and me, at the University of the Witwatersrand. Eugene studied mining and environmental geology at the University of Venda. His experience in underground mining, surface mining, consulting, and also research. He's an active member of the Geological Society of South Africa and about to become even more active. He's also a member of the SAIMM, the GIS-SA, and a candidate scientist with SACNAS, where he is currently undertaking a professional mentorship program funded by the GSSA and SACNAS. So Eugene, we're seriously looking forward to hearing you talk to us about agrogeology. Please go ahead. Eugene, there's no sound. You need to enable your computer sound. Under share screen, click on share screen. You'll find a button, I think it's at the bottom left-hand side, that says enable computer sound.
Should I try again?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eugene, and I'm from
perfect. Thank you.
Institute for Soil and Water, based in Pretoria, as well as a master's student at the Peat University. I'll be sharing with you today the roles of a geologist in agriculture, which people often, refer to it as agrogeology. Before I start with my presentation, let me appreciate the presence of everyone, the Geological Society of South Africa, SACNAS, Peat University, and the Agricultural Research Council. Before we go deeper into the presentation, let me introduce myself as briefly as possible. I was born in Limpopo province in the former homeland called Venda, part of the Soulpansberg group, and I studied there from my primary education, high school education, and I also did a few of my tertiary qualifications there. I studied with the University of Venda, my initial qualification in mining and environmental geology. I also did my geographical information system certificate with them. I did my mine sampling certificate with Chamber of Mines, which is currently known as the Minerals Council of South Africa. I did project management with the University of Johannesburg up to the advanced level. I did my competency certificates in mining with the Mining Qualification Authority. And as I said, I'm currently pursuing my master's research degree in the University of Witwatersrand. And just to explain a bit of my work career, I have experience in working with the underground mines, surface mines, consulting and research With the underground mining, I worked as a rock engineering technician. Surface mines, I worked as an environmental consultant. And in the consulting environment, I actually worked as a hydrogeologist. And in research, I'm an earth scientist where I deal with soil, climate, water, and remote sensing. So, what do geologists actually do in agriculture? Just like mining, geologists are not actively involved in production, but they do quite a lot of work in establishing, how production will come out based on assaying of different, samples and, mapping, delineating ore bodies and all that. Similarly, in agriculture, geologists do a lot of work in, research, trying to understand the soil properties, physical and chemical, as well as the water issues, wherein they try to understand the quality, the source of water, and different things that we'll discuss later here. So I said one of the major focus of geologists in agriculture is soil assessment, when they try to understand different parameters that are in soil to try and solve problems that are experienced with um, soil, water, and other things in agricultural problems related to productivity and yields. So on my screen here, I've actually indicated two scenarios wherein I try to show some special distribution of two different things. One being distribution of one heavy metal, and on the right I have distribution of electrical conductivity, which actually illustrate distribution of soil salinity. So to partition this, if we were to look on the left map, which shows the distribution of copper as a heavy metal, in agriculture, you cannot farm or do agricultural, activity just anywhere as you please, because that's land. So if you are to look on the suitability of soil, you'll have to look also at how the crop that you want to plant there um, reacts with, different levels of a particular heavy metal. For example, as I did put here, copper. Copper is useful to, human health as well as plants and, other living organisms in a very small, or required amount. But, too much of everything becomes a problem. So if you look at the map, there's a red area which shows high concentration of copper levels. So if you were to plant, let's say spinach there, and your spinach takes, a lot of copper as an element, and you happen to eat or feed, the surrounding community with spinach which has, high concentration of copper levels, which in a human body they become toxic, then you start experiencing, problems wherein they'll say, okay, farmer X produces spinach that kills people. Consequently, your spinach might not grow because, the amount of toxic metals which are there is too much to prevent, movement of water, say movement of also what you put in soil as fertilizers and other stuff. So geologists actually get involved in, doing a lot of geochemical work, trying to understand soils, especially in the formerly disturbed environment. That map uh, indicates an area somewhere close to the Zimbabwean border in Musina, where copper mining was, a thing back in the days before I was even born. So on my right, I have the salinity distribution map, which shows, spatial distribution of um, electrical conductivity. Uh, it's actually results that came out from one of the farms in the Falhards irrigation scheme in the Northern Cape. So the problem there was that certain crops do not, perform well within the same portion of farm. So we try to look at different properties only to find out that there's too much, concentration of salt and salinity in this area has been, a well-known preached story which continues to exist. If some of you know the Northern Cape, they can tell you about salt production, through a lot of salt pans. Great. So another thing that geologists actually look at, if you look at the picture on the left there, you can see a mine waste dump. And then going down, you can actually see very nice dry grass. It was during winter season. During summer, the grass is, evergreen, very healthy. But if you look at the color of the mine dump itself, and you look at the color of the soil where the tape runs, it's the same. Why is it the same? It's the same because uh, the waste rock material, fine ones, they are actually, washed away from the waste dump downward, actually contaminating the whole area. So on the right picture, that's actually me when I was doing something called slake test. When we're doing land functionality analysis, slake test is usually done to try and understand the behavior of soil when it is in contact with water. For example, when it rains, how will the soil actually behave? So with slake test, you just take a sample and put it in the water and observe what happens over time. Say if you have a minute to observe what happens. When you put in your soil, you observe if the soil in the container will actually changes water into, that milky color, or it will take time to actually change water, or it's not going to change water, at all. That tells you something about, the strength of the material that you are trying to analyze. So that's one part of the roles that geologists actually do. So other than that, combined with what I showed you, the, assessment of soil samples, chemical and physical, geologists can actually, quantify if a particular land is suitable for farming or any human activities that they would love to do on that piece of land. Another thing that they focus on is land degradation and environmental management. On my right, there's an image which shows, um, an old agricultural land which is currently being used for grazing. You can see dark spots there. They're not rocks, they're actually cows which were grazing when I actually visited the site. And you can see a lot of gullies that have developed, even behind that windmill. That's actually a very small gully trying to, develop, and with time it actually, undercut the windmill, which um, actually supplies water uh, to the nearest collection point, which actually as being used for the very same kettles. So if you look on the picture on the left, uh, there's a huge gully there. And going down, you can actually see that the surface is actually bare. There's no grass. That's the consequence of, erosion, which is happening in the whole area. That's actually in Free State, in an area called Lady Brand. There's been, a lot of reports um, and studies that have been done in that area, trying to understand what is actually, causing that kind of um, erosion. So what I showed you is actually some erosion experimental plots that were actually designed long time ago by one geologist, Dr. Gary Peterson, who is still actively involved, in soil sciences. So they were developed to try and understand, the amount of sediments that is lost over time when those gullies are being developed. So on the image on the right, you can actually see different plots. Some of them are damaged, of course, but you can see a plot with, a line of rock barriers, wherein he was trying to understand uh, if he could actually put some barriers, what will happen over time? Will they actually trap, the materials that are being eroded or not? So it actually worked at some point, and then some kind of gabions were actually constructed within, highly erosive area. And with time, because of the power of water and, maybe loose soil that's around there, uh, the the whole erosion thing started undercutting the gabions, and all the gabions have actually collapsed. So the image on the left is actually a recent image where, we were trying to repair the plots and trying to model the surface roughness and trying to do some geotechnical work to understand the strength of material and see if we can actually, try and bring foreign materials to try and stop the level of erosion which is actually taking place. Another thing, which is a very common thing almost everywhere, that's hydrogeological studies. Geologists do quite a lot of, hydrogeological studies emanating from, your groundwater modeling, wherein they try and quantify, the amount of water that's being recharged, in the aquifers and the amount of water that's actually being discharged through pumping and see the impact of, that behavior or activity within the water source. Other than that, they also do quite a lot of, water quality assessment, water testing, pump test, try and see the yield that actually boreholes can actually give um, over a given time with the amount of water that's available in the aquifer. So the image that I've displayed from my top right, where you see, water flowing, and then going to the left, we have a white box surrounded by barley. That's not grass, that's barley, which makes beer. Going down, it's the very same box opened. So what happens is when farmers use water to irrigate, let's say using pivot irrigation, uh, the crop itself will actually use water, and part of the water will be lost through, evaporation and evapotranspiration, and then excess water will actually go to join the underground water. So the box that you see there, it's a component of what we call uh, weighing lysometer, which is a device that measures, the amount of water that the plant uses and the amount of water that the plant actually loses. So inside that, there's a white bottle. That white bottle is a drainage bottle wherein excess water goes in after the crop has actually used the water that it has been given. So as geologists, we use those kind of devices to try and collect water that has gone through the soil and that the plant is actually using to try and assess the quality of the water itself and compare it with the water source quality and relate it to the plant health as well as the amount of fertilizers which are being applied. Great. So just to add more on what I've been saying, I'm going to share with you a case study titled Peat Fire Detection, Monitoring and Management. What was happening here is that the Department of Water Affairs, Water Research Commission, and the Agricultural Research Council actually joined hands in trying to save one of the famous ecosystems, which is called a peatland. A peatland is a wetland which contains a considerable amount of peat. And peatland refers to peat soil and a wetland habitat growing on its surface. That means it's a wetland that contains, peat. And what is peat? Peat is just an accumulation of, organic matter in a waterlogged condition. Studies actually says peatlands covers about, 3% of the global land surface. So that's quite, a lot. Peatlands are not only, just wetlands. They actually um, habitats for, quite a lot of species. That includes birds. They breed there, all these water-living organisms. They find their habitats there. Other than that, human beings, on the other hand, use this kind of systems as water sources. Like the example in the Northwest Province in Mafikeng, the whole of Mafikeng area actually depends on the Molobo Eye, which is a peatland wetland, and the Molobo Eye, which a percentage of the total and right right
Please,
up
can you mute yourself, Sabine?
as the Malamani Eye was written. Oh, that's in Afrikaans. That's the very similar peatland, which is actually on its degradation stage. I will explain how that happens. So if you look in figure A, surrounding the Molopo Eye, there's quite a lot of, residential activities happening around. And you go outwards, the very same area in Mlamani, where I actually showed you the eye that's actually losing its life. We have quite a lot of agricultural activities. If you can actually look around there, you can see a lot of, circular shapes, which shows some kind of pivot irrigations. So the water source in that area is actually the very same eye. They have, instead of directly taking water from the ice, they have, um, drilled quite a lot of, considerable boreholes to try and abstract water to, actually produce better. So the major problem here was that um, a lot of water is being, abstracted from ground, and then it affects all those wetlands. So when they abstract more water for, residential use, agricultural use, there's a decline in water table, and the peatland starts, losing quite considerable amount of water, and the process is irreversible. So it's actually permanent damage if you try and take out all the water from the system. I'll explain how that happens. Great. As I said, it takes quite considerable time for peat to accumulate. They say peat accumulates about 1 millimeter per year on an average. And then if you look at the diagram there, it shows peat forming. That's the initial stage of, coal that we say, oh, we're going to mine coal. The mother of coal is actually peat. So with continuous heat pressure compression, coal actually forms from, peatlands. So they say it takes about 12,000 to 60,000 years for peat to accumulate, just to form a 3 meter seam. So you can tell how much time it takes. That's, quite a lot of, lives. Uh, None of us will actually, live 12,000 years. Not even to talk about 150, maybe, our forefathers and, all those who lived before us. Great. So over there, I have two types of peatland systems. One on the left, which is a pristine system, about A, and one on the right, which is a degraded peatland system. How does a peatland become degraded? It becomes degraded when, there's a lot of uh, or over pumping of underground water, which actually, removes all the amount of water that is available in that groundwater dependent ecosystem. So figure B shows a degraded peatland environment. You can see the color difference. Above the water table is actually brown, and then below the water table is actually lighter because there's still, a bit of amount of water, and you can actually see the amount of, gases that are actually going out, your carbon dioxide, your methane. You can mention it. From that, it shows that the release of gases is actually greater than 1 in figure B. But if you go to figure A, the release of gases is actually less than 1. Why? Because the peatland or the peat itself, it's covered. It's actually in waterlogged conditions, so there's no much amount of gases that is going out. So what happens when we, over abstract water? Number one, the water table declines. Number two, the peat is exposed, and that's permanent damage. So you can never, even if you try and bring water back, it will really take time for you to you know retain the structure of the pit. As I said, it takes so many years. So gases also form part of that pit. So how do we monitor the water usage or water levels in such ecosystems? So we have what we call monitoring systems. So monitoring systems can be in a form of boreholes, which can be located in farmers' lands or domestic, or private properties, and we do give them some kind of divers that they install in their wells to try and do what we call participatory approach. So they get the data, we also get the data, and then we help in decision making. Other than that, with peatland ecosystems, we put some kind of piezometers which we just auger maybe up to 5 meters and put some PVC pipes wherein we often go and monitor the water tables or install the very same kind of divers which will tell us whatever is happening when the farmers are actually pumping water. So why should we monitor our water levels in this kind of ecosystems? We need to do that because once there's no water in the system and the gases start, being released to the atmosphere, when it's too hot, miracles happen. The so-called spontaneous combustion, wherein fire just, ignite while no one is actually, conducted, the lighting of fire happens. So if you look on the first diagram on the left with a label 2016 underneath, it's actually a peatland which was in its degradation stage. So just behind the red line where there are three people and some kind of tall reef, it's actually where there was still a bit of water. And on the other side where there's supposed return deep water 1.5 meter and an individual standing, that's actually where the peatland has actually lost, completely the water. So over time, farmers and the community in that area didn't actually stop overuse of water, and it burned. And once it burns, like I said, the condition is irreversible. It becomes ash, and then you have lost um, the peat. That's number one, and then you actually lose your ecosystem that supplies with water and habitats for other living organisms. So what do geologists actually do in this kind of ecosystems? They try and determine the age of the pit itself by sampling. They sample to different meters and try and use called carbon dating to see the um, age of different layers that forms the pit. Other than that, they also do what we call water source determination, wherein they try to see uh, the type of source that they can be feeding the system that they call their peatland. So what they do is they try and sample around the surrounding bowls, they sample rainwater, they sample surrounding dams and rivers and try and plot, the results that they get from using what they call stable isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen and try to see if they actually, um, relate to each other. So if, for example, in the diagram on my right bottom, there's a line which shows, scattered points running along and some outside of that line, which can be a regression line or global meteoric water line or local meteoric water line, which shows the originality of meteoric water in that region. So if water, for instance, comes from the surrounding stream, the water that you sample from the pit and the water that you sample from the river will actually run along, um, the line. Why? Because their isotopes have correlation. Uh, this is just a typical pit cross-section that actually created based on the samples that geologists actually log when they are trying to, determine the age and the extent of the peatland. So as I said, just like in mining, to monitor this kind of things, uh, it requires a teamwork. So it's not only about geologists and a few scientists involved. In this kind of work, we actually worked with quite a lot of remote sensors who tried to uh, determine when there was actually a fire in active fires which people could not see using satellite technology, wherein they use some kind of Landsat 8, which has a resolution of 30 meters. That means a pixel size is 30 meter by 30 meter. So in a wetland, sometimes a wetland can be covered in one pixel. So if you try and determine the temperature just from one pixel, you'll get one value. So they introduce some kind of use of drones wherein they try to use thermal cameras with high resolution, which gives them more pixels within the very same ecosystem, and try to see where actually the higher temperatures are. I was gonna talk about the energy balance models, but due to time, I'm not gonna go into details on that. So from the imageries that they obtain from thermal and the multispectral imageries, they actually develop some kind of monitoring wherein they use indices such as NDVI and DWI to try and see the moisture on the surface, as well as the health status of whatever is on the surface. So also they extract some kind of temperature, which is land surface temperature, and related to the NDVI or NDWI, and then they can actually tell when fire will happen or when people should actually stop overusing water. So like I said earlier before, this shows two systems. The red shows the system which has been lost completely, and the blue shows the systems which are still active. So the only way to actually conserve this type of ecosystems is to keep the pit wet. That means your use of water should be equal to the water that goes in the system as a form of what we call recharge. Thank you very much for being part of the presentation. I would like to describe as much as I can and answer questions that you might have. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Eugene, for a very interesting presentation. Let me just put my volume. Do we have any questions from the floor? You can either put your hand up, or you can simply unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. I forgot the way I should put my hand up.
Not a problem. Go ahead.
The question I have is that okay, because like currently there's a lot of interest from industry with regards to renewable energy, like solar farms and wind farms and so forth. So has there been a study to determine what the impact will be? I mean, all this work that the gentleman has done, like is there a study to determine how this will impact, us, like the soil structure and soil erosion, etc. Because I mean, I can imagine before they install, it's like, solar panels, they have to remove all the plantation, but I'm just thinking long term, it will have a severe impact in terms of soil erosion, etc.
Eugene, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, what we actually do before initiating any activity, um, environmentalists usually do what we call impact assessment. So they actually look at the soil structure before you actually start, constructing, putting all those structures that you actually put the solar panels. So if there's a need to control, the soil that is there, if it's weak, they can try and put, low plantation just below the solar panels, or try to put those kind of gabions that actually spoke about, to try and protect the soil from erosion. But surely there's a lot of studies that actually ARC do in those situations.
Okay, thank you. Well, just a concern from my side, seeing this excitement with renewable energy. But yeah, I was just wondering about that. Thank you.
Fair enough.
Do we have any other questions?
Could I possibly add to that?
Go ahead,
With regards
Camille.
to what is being done in terms of renewable energy, and you have these solar farms. I know there are a few already up and running in South Africa. Generally, these farms are located in areas that have very little vegetation anyway, because you want the highest impact of the sun. And as he said, there's always these EIAs that go ahead before construction and everything. But what I have noticed, which is a bit concerning, not only in agriculture, not only in renewable energy, but in mining as well, that these type of studies are only done during, say, pre-feas and feasibility studies of these big projects, and not actually starting with conceptual. And then you end up getting, the investors and everything have put a lot of money into it already, and then by feasibility stage, all of a sudden, there's not enough groundwater, or the soil conditions incorrect, and these type of things that crop up from hydrogeological studies. And that's why I'm just commenting, because I'm in that field. But there are both the pros and the cons to renewable energy, and sometimes you have to sacrifice the soil conditions specifically for that area, but do as much as you can to protect downstream or down gradient, essentially, and then have a very strong rehabilitation plan after closure. So there is actually quite a lot of studies going into renewable energy and how to be more environmentally friendly. Just as an example, on the SACNAS website, where you can get extra CPD points by reading articles in that, there's actually an article on the Vero eagle and how wind farms have affected populations of them. And a recent study actually showed if they paint the wind farm turbines black, you get less eagles being killed actually by that. So there is quite a lot of study going on at the moment, and I think geology really needs to start expanding more into the environmental aspects and not focusing solely on mining. Sorry, I just wanted to say that bit to add, sorry.
Thanks, Camille. Anybody else with a question or a comment? Going once?
Yes, I've got another one.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. I'm not sure, like, if maybe there is maybe like existing remote sensing information, say going back, I don't know, 10, 20 years or possibly 30 years, for us maybe to assess like what the impact has been, like on the soil, like over a long term, to maybe to try and predict what the implications could be like in the long term. Is that something practical, or is there no way remote sensing could potentially be incorporated?
Actually, there is. If you looked on my second last slide, where I was showing some kind of land surface temperature, that's actually a time series which started somewhere in 1975. So the
Okay.
same thing, you can actually do some kind of change detection just to see what actually happened over time. So you can get the area of each and every year. If we're talking about erosion, you can actually measure the impact using area and some kind of classification from satellite imageries. And
Okay.
that's actually something that people are actually doing every year.
Okay, so then can we use that information to predict maybe, let's say, for the next 10, 20 years with all
Yes.
this?
Yes, using some statistical techniques like ANOVA, you can actually project or forecast the impact that will happen, let's say, for the next 5 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Sold. Eugene, thank you ever so much for your time and effort in doing your presentation. And we look forward to hearing more from you as your projects progress. To everybody else, thank you so much for your time in joining us with this second to last lunchtime lecture of the year. And we'll be having plenty more next year. So please do keep an eye on the GSSA diary. And with that, I'd like to thank you all very much. And Craig, you may end the meeting.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you all.